Hello, everyone. My name is Domuta, and I'm going to talk about the mobile banking behavior of Austrians and Romanians and the role of culture within this context. The article has been written together with University Professor Dr. Christine Strauss from the University of Vienna. Our presentation is structured as follows. I'll begin with an introduction to mobile banking and provide you with an overview of related work and our research motivation. Then I'll move on to our research model and highlight the methodology of our work. After that, I'll go into the results and discussion and conclude our presentation with limitations of our study, future research recommendations, and conclusion. I'd like to start our presentation with a quote which reflects the importance of mobile banking nowadays. So mobile banking has been recognized among the latest in a series of recent technological wonders to impact our daily life and the financial sector. In this context, the application version is believed to be the catalyst for the rise in mobile banking over the past years. And in addition, due to the effects of the pandemic, financial institutions had to double down efforts on their digitalization strategies. And for this reason, banking apps nowadays, functionalities have expanded beyond traditional financial management. You'll see certain mobile banking apps providing you with the ability to purchase tickets for public transport, to pay your taxes, or to pay your bills. On a country level, there are differences in adoption of online and mobile banking. And we looked in this case at Austria and Romania, where we saw a big discrepancy. So online banking adoption rates in 2023 were 70%, 76% in Austria, and only around 23% in Romania. I'd like to move on to give you now a bit of background on the literature of cultural moderation effects within the adoption of mobile banking. And for this reason, we selected 4 studies that have implemented culture as a moderator of the relationship between technology acceptance factors and the mobile banking adoption. By technology acceptance factors, we refer to those factors that people take into account when they think about adopting a new technology. For instance, they might think about the performance expected from the service, the effort, how easy it is to use, whether there are any social influences, so they might be influenced by their social peers. The first 2 studies on the slide have implemented culture as at the national level of analysis. This means that they didn't measure culture in the study, but adopted the country scores from the study of Hofstede, which is a study conducted more than 40 years ago and is recognized internationally as the first empirical model of national culture dimensions. The other 2 studies on the slide have looked at the influence of culture from an individual level of analysis. The findings of these studies and the others that we found through our literature review have driven our motivation for our research. So firstly, we saw extensive research conducted on mobile banking adoption factors. However, only a limited number of studies on cultural moderation effects. Secondly, we saw predominant use of the country scores from Hofstede. However, as a few researchers have already argued, culture is formed through the individual values, which are combined to create the culture of a group, and the term espoused cultural values has entered the research as of 2006. And thirdly, we saw limited research conducted in Austria and Romania, and specifically on mobile banking applications. However, from our perspective, the comparison between the two countries is very interesting, especially if we look at the country scores, which the study of Hofstede appointed the countries more than 40 years ago. So as you can see on this slide, there's a big discrepancy in terms of power distance between Austria and Romania. So you see Austria scores very low on power distance, whereas Romania scores very high. Power distance refers to the willingness of an individual to accept an unequal distribution of power. So for these reasons, our research question is, how does culture at the individual level of analysis impact on the relationship between technology acceptance factors and the adoption intention of mobile banking applications? And this brings us to our research model. And as you can see on this slide, our research model is part of a broader project. However, in this article, we focus on the interaction between the cultural moderators and the technology acceptance factors to understand the adoption intention of mobile banking applications. With black arrows, you see hypothesized effects that we were able to establish based on the literature. With dashed black arrows, we these were results that we were able to test with our data. However, we weren't able to back those. We weren't able to establish a hypothesis based on the literature. And gray areas and the gray arrows represent sections of our research model, which we didn't include in this research paper. We established 20 hypotheses. And in terms of the methodology used for our study, we used an online survey, which was translated in German and in Romania. We established 4 inclusion criteria of participants in our study. First of all was the Austrian or Romanian nationality, the use of a smartphone, and the holder of a bank account. So people had to have a bank account to participate in the survey, and their familiarity with mobile banking applications. In case participants weren't aware about mobile banking applications, we provided a brief description of the surveys. We collected data mainly through Facebook groups, a survey platform called Survey Circle in Austria, and based on the snowball principle. In terms of the instrumentation of our variables, we adapted the individual culture from the work of Srite and Karahana from 2006, and we measured the items on a 6-point Likert scale. In terms of the statistical analysis of our work, we conducted hierarchical moderated multiple regression analysis. First of all, we looked at the differences between the national culture and the espoused cultural values. So these are the difference between the country scores adopted by Hofstede and the espoused cultural values of our participants. As you know, the country scores were developed more than 40 years ago, and we tested those differences in mean values by nationality by conducting t-tests. So consistent with the findings from Hofstede and with the country scores, we found 3 of our dimensions more or less replicating the same country scores. However, in terms of the power distance, we found only a marginal difference. If you remember on the slide where I show you the comparison, the country scores between Austria and Romania, there was a big difference in terms of power distance. However, in our study, we didn't find such discrepancy. And also, contrary to Hofstede's country scores, we found a reversed level of masculinity. So in our study across our sample, Austrian participants had lower masculinity values compared to Romanians. In a second step, we looked at the moderation effects across our entire sample, which was 425 participants. Out of those, 196 Austrian participants. In this graph, you'll see that we highlighted with green arrows the positive moderation effects and with red the negative moderation effects. We found that espoused masculinity is the strongest moderator across all participants. And contrary to our expectations, we saw that individuals with high levels of masculinity were less interested in the performance expected from the surveys and more interested in how easy it is to use in terms of effort expectancy and the perceived financial costs. One explanation for this result is the potential experience of our participants with mobile banking applications, and the cost sensitivity may be due to the fact that our participants had a high level of masculinity, and this means that they might be the breadwinners of the family. So any costs that they might incur from using a technology, they might make them more reluctant to adopt it. We also saw a positive influence of high espoused individualism on the adoption intention through the interaction with disposition to trust. And across our research, we found that high individualistic societies were found to have higher disposition to trust. So one explanation for our finding might be that this high disposition to trust, which means trust towards other people, might give rise to trust in other technologies. As hypothesized, we found that high uncertainty avoidance negatively predicts adoption intention through the interaction with perceived risk. So this means that individuals who are more sensitive towards uncertainty, they will be more concerned with the risk of adopting a new technology. In a third step, we looked at the moderation and direct effects in Austria and Romania. So in Austria, we were able to find that high espoused masculinity positively moderates the relationship between social influence and adoption intention. So participants who had a high level of masculinity, they were more influenced by their social peers in the adoption intention. We also found no significant effects in terms of power distance, and we found a direct effect on the adoption intention of uncertainty avoidance. So this means that people who had high uncertainty avoidance were more likely to adopt mobile banking applications. The individuals appear to be aware of what mobile banking apps already have to offer, and they feel more comfortable using them than going to traditional banking methods. In terms of the results across our Romanian sample, we found more significant moderation effects compared to the results in Austria, and we found two cultural variables which had a direct effect on adoption intention, and these were the espoused individualism and espoused power distance. Of course, our study is not without any limitations, as any other study. First of all, we use the nationality as a proxy for culture, and as you may know, there's a high migration in Austria over the last decade, so it is expected that some of the participants were not born in Austria, but acquired the citizenship due to fulfilling the residency requirements. Future research could consider selecting the participants based on the primary language spoken, country of origin, or the years lived in the country. In addition, our results might be limited by the sample composition, as most of our respondents were between 30 and 40 years. They were highly educated students or are employed. So these groups might be more interested in adopting mobile banking applications. And for this reason, we would recommend future research to consider replicating our study with a more heterogeneous sample. In addition, we also analyze non-user behavior, and future research might consider conducting a comparison between users and non-users of mobile banking applications. And finally, our focus on Austria and Romania could be a further limitation of our findings, and future research could try to validate our research model in other countries and maybe conduct a comparison between rural and urban areas. So coming back to our research question, we have demonstrated that culture moderators are important for understanding the relationship between technology acceptance factors and adoption intention of mobile banking applications. We found that high espoused masculinity was the strongest moderator, and we also were able to demonstrate direct effects of espoused cultural dimensions on the adoption intention. We showcased also the importance of culture measurement, as we were able to establish that three of our culture dimensions were consistent with the finding of Hofstede. However, there was only a marginal difference in terms of power distance, and we found the reversed level of masculinity between our countries. So our references are listed on this slide, and we thank you very much for your attention.